This isn't just a story about a life saved at 35,000 feet. It's about a mother's courage, grief, and the unexpected power of one selfless act to rewrite a family's fate. Naomi Ellis, a quiet woman weighed down by loss, found herself thrust into a high-stakes drama mid-flight when a stranger's life hung by a thread, a stranger she didn't realize was tied to the very tragedy that shattered her world. Who was this man she saved? And how would uncovering his identity unravel secrets far darker than anyone could imagine? How do you save a life only to discover it belongs to the man whose decisions took your husband away? Could forgiveness and justice coexist in the face of devastating betrayal? And when does courage turn from a private act into a battle for truth? Join us as we follow Naomi and her children on an emotional journey of healing, confrontation, and reckoning. The story will pull you in, challenge your views on justice, and leave you questioning what it really means to save someone. If you believe in the extraordinary strength of ordinary people, hit like, share this story, and subscribe to our channel to hear more powerful true stories that inspire and transform. The cabin lights dimmed gently as the plane prepared for departure, casting a soft glow across the rows of passengers settling into their temporary airborne lives. The muffled hum of engines rolled beneath the floor like a heartbeat beginning to rise. Outside the small triple-pane window, the lights of Detroit faded into a shimmer of memory. Naomi Ellis sat motionless in seat 14A, her back straight, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The seatbelt pressed against her ribs, her shoulders ached, but she didn't shift. Not yet. She didn't want to disturb the fragile calm she had built around herself. Her daughter, Ari, sat beside her, swinging her legs gently. Her sketchbook was already open on her tray table, a half-finished drawing of a superhero in a flowing lavender cape staring out from the page. Ari always drew on planes. It soothed her. In the row behind them, Malik, Naomi's 15-year-old son, wore headphones and a hoodie drawn up tightly over his head. His long legs folded awkwardly into the cramped space, his eyes hidden behind the glare of his phone screen. He hadn't said much all day, but Naomi was used to that. Grief showed up differently for each of them. Naomi glanced at the laminated safety card sticking out of the seat pocket in front of her. She didn't read it. She knew what it said. She had read it on every flight she had ever taken with Evan. Her chest tightened at the thought of him. Even now, 8 months after the accident, she couldn't sit in a plane without feeling his absence like a missing limb. Evan had loved flying. He used to grip her hand during takeoff like it was their first roller coaster ride together. Now, her hand sat alone. The safety video started playing above her. Naomi didn't look. Instead, her eyes drifted to the window. The tarmac was quiet. Snow flurried at the edge of the runway. This flight from Detroit to Santa Barbara was supposed to be a break, a breath. Her sister-in-law, Alicia, had insisted. "You need a change of air." Alicia had said over the phone weeks ago, "Grief needs space. Let the kids feel the sun. Let yourself breathe again." Naomi hadn't wanted to go, but Ari had been waking up crying. Malik had started skipping school. The air in their house had grown too heavy with memory, too thick with the echo of Evan's voice. She turned back toward her daughter. Ari was coloring in her superhero's boots now. The crayon squeaked softly against the paper. Naomi placed a gentle hand on her back. "You okay?" Baby Ari nodded, but didn't look up. "Is Daddy flying with us?" she asked quietly. Naomi's breath caught. She stared at the aisle for a moment before answering. "I think he's watching over us," she said, just like always. Ari nodded again. Then she whispered, "I made him a new superhero. She can fly without wings." Naomi smiled faintly. "That sounds just like him." The plane began its slow taxi down the runway. Malik didn't look up, but Naomi saw his fingers tighten around the edges of his phone. She knew he hated takeoff, hated the weightlessness, hated losing control. So did she. She closed her eyes as the engines roared to life. The cabin trembled. The plane lifted into the dark sky with a slow, inevitable grace. Naomi opened her eyes just in time to see the lights of Detroit vanish beneath a veil of clouds. Somewhere behind them, the life they had lived for years disappeared into the winter night. Somewhere ahead, California waited. As the plane leveled out, flight attendants began moving through the cabin with practiced efficiency. The familiar scent of brewed coffee and sterile air mixed with something faintly floral. Naomi couldn't tell if it came from the plane or from the older woman across the aisle, whose lavender perfume seemed to bloom with altitude. She looked to the front of the cabin, toward the economy plus section. A man sat in an aisle seat 2 rows ahead, alone. He looked to be in his late 50s, maybe older, dressed in a tailored charcoal gray shirt and polished shoes. Everything about him looked expensive, but not loud. His hair was mostly silver, brushed neatly back, and he carried himself with a precision that reminded Naomi of military men. She caught only a brief glimpse of his face, but it was enough. There was something rigid in his expression, not rude, but distant. A man who did not tolerate mistakes. "Who's that?" Ari whispered, noticing where her mom was looking. "Just a passenger," Naomi replied softly. "He looks like a businessman, or maybe a secret agent." Naomi chuckled. "Maybe both." Ari squinted at him. "He doesn't smile." "Not everyone smiles all the time," Naomi said gently. Ari frowned. "He looks like he forgot how." Naomi didn't answer. The man hadn't looked at anyone. Not once. Not during boarding. Not when the attendant handed him a bottle of water. Not even when the child in front of him accidentally kicked his seat. He sat still, tablet in hand, stylus dancing quickly across the screen. The lines in his face looked chiseled from stone. Naomi turned away and closed her eyes again. She didn't want to think about strangers. She didn't want to think about much at all. The cabin lights dimmed once more. Ari pulled up her blanket and leaned against her mother's side. Malik hadn't moved. For a brief, flickering moment, Naomi allowed herself to feel stillness. Above the clouds, in the middle of the night sky, held in a pressurized tube with her children asleep beside her. She felt something close to peace, but she didn't yet know that the man in seat 4D was about to change their lives forever. The cabin had fallen into its typical late-flight rhythm. Passengers dozed, movie screens flickered dimly, and the occasional chime of a call button punctuated the quiet. Somewhere above the Colorado Rockies, Flight 227 glided smoothly across the night sky. Naomi Ellis sat with her seat reclined just slightly, a blanket draped over her lap, and a half-finished cup of herbal tea resting in the armrest holder. Her eyes were open, but unfocused, drifting somewhere between exhaustion and reflection. She wasn't thinking of anything in particular, which for her was a small miracle. For the past 8 months, her mind had been an engine that never powered down. Tonight, for a fleeting moment, it idled. Ari had fallen asleep curled into her side, cradling her sketchbook like a teddy bear. Naomi looked down at her daughter, gently brushing a stray curl from her forehead. Ari had always been soft-hearted but brave, the kind of child who cried over stray dogs and then tried to feed them crackers. She carried her grief like a question she didn't know how to ask. Malik was still wide awake behind them, the glow of his phone screen faintly visible between the seats. Naomi had asked him twice to try to rest, but he had shrugged her off with a quiet, "I'm fine." He wasn't, of course. None of them were, but healing doesn't happen on a schedule, and Naomi had stopped trying to rush it. A familiar dry cough snapped her attention forward. It came from 2 rows ahead, the man in seat 4D. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp, intentional, somehow, the kind of cough that demanded notice. He reached for his water bottle and took a slow sip. Naomi watched him out of the corner of her eye. He hadn't moved much during the flight. No movie, no music, just that tablet he'd been working on for hours. Now, he looked different, slouched slightly, one hand massaging his temple. The posture of control was slipping. The cough came again. Then a third. Naomi's brow furrowed. Flight attendants passed by slowly with trays of drinks. One paused near the man and offered him a refill. He declined with a brief shake of the head, not bothering to look up. There was something odd in the way he moved. Stiff, almost uncoordinated. He tried to resume his work, but the stylus slipped from his fingers. He reached down to retrieve it and struggled to sit back up. Naomi watched as he pressed a hand to his chest. It was subtle, but unmistakable. A grimace, a flicker of something behind the eyes. Then another cough, deeper now. His breath caught in his throat. His hand trembled slightly as he reached again for the bottle, only to spill water down his shirt. The woman across the aisle cast him a glance, unsure. She leaned back in her seat. Naomi felt her pulse begin to rise. She looked down at Ari, still sleeping, then back up toward 4D. The man's face was flushed now, not the healthy red of a brisk walk, but a blotchy, uneven red that crept up his neck. His breath was coming quicker, shallow, audible. His hands fumbled with his collar. Naomi leaned forward, scanning for the nearest flight attendant. There was a brief lull, and then it happened. The man shifted in his seat, tried to rise, and failed. His body jerked, then collapsed back into the chair. His head lolled to the side. His eyes, wide now, stared unfocused at nothing. His chest heaved once, then stopped. Panic spread like electricity. A young woman seated beside him gasped and pressed her call button repeatedly. A bell chimed. Heads turned. Voices rose in confusion. Is he okay? What's going on? Is there a doctor? The flight attendant nearest the front, a woman with dark hair pulled into a severe bun, rushed down the aisle. Her name tag read Lindsay. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked, kneeling beside him. She reached for his wrist. Her voice trembled as she called over her shoulder. "Get the med kit, now!" Naomi's heart was in her throat. Her fingers tightened around the armrest. Ari stirred beside her. "Mom," she whispered sleepily. Naomi didn't answer. Behind her, Malik's headphones came off. What's happening? Naomi's breathing quickened. She felt the rush of old memories, the cold, sterile hallway of the Naval Base Hospital, the voice on the phone telling her there had been an accident, the silence that followed. She remembered Evan's voice most of all. Calm, measured, even when he was terrified. Don't wait for someone else. Naomi, you step up." She closed her eyes for a second, then opened them. Harry was awake now, blinking in confusion. "Mom, that man." "I know," Naomi said softly. She unbuckled her seatbelt. "Stay here, both of you. I need you to be brave." Malik started to stand. "No," she said, turning to him. "You stay with your sister, but bring your phone." He blinked. "Why timer app? Stopwatch. I need you to time me. 2-minute intervals." His mouth opened, then closed. Finally, he nodded. Naomi stepped into the aisle. Heads turned. Passengers watched her like a ripple in still water. She passed row after row until she reached 4D. Lindsay looked up at her, pale and uncertain. "I'm Dr. Ellis," Naomi said firmly, even though the words felt foreign in her mouth. "PhD in biology, certified in CPR." "What's his status?" "No pulse," Lindsay whispered. He collapsed. Naomi nodded, dropping to her knees beside the man. The carpet burned against her skin. She pressed 2 fingers to his neck, searching. Nothing. No breath. No movement. "We need to move him, get him on the floor." With the help of the flight attendant and the woman from the window seat, they shifted the man into the aisle. He was heavier than he looked. Dead weight. Unresponsive. The flight attendant returned with the AED in a red case, her hands shaking. "Start compressions," Naomi said. "Tell the captain we need to divert. Now." She didn't think. Her mind was a tunnel, a single point of focus. She found the center of the man's chest and began to push. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each compression sent a shock up her arms, the unnatural give of his sternum, the horrifying resistance of flesh and bone. She blocked out the faces, the whispers, the smell of disinfectant. She thought only of Evan, of the moment she couldn't save him. She wouldn't let it happen again. Naomi counted silently, keeping the rhythm steady. Malik appeared beside her, phone in hand. "Time started," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. She nodded. The man's eyes remained closed, his lips were turning blue. Naomi's arms screamed in protest. She didn't stop. Naomi Ellis pressed down on the stranger's chest, each compression precise and forceful. Her arms ached with the effort, but she refused to stop. 1, 2, 3, she silently counted, the beat anchoring her focus while chaos bloomed quietly around her. The man beneath her wasn't responding. His lips were tinged blue now, and his skin had taken on the waxy pallor of a body surrendering. He had gone entirely limp. The silence of his stillness was terrifying. Passengers peered over seats, some covering their mouths, others whispering with growing panic. A baby began to cry somewhere near the back. The hum of the plane's engines continued as if oblivious to the life or death drama unfolding in the aisle. "Malik," Naomi said through clenched teeth, sweat beading on her forehead. "Time, 52 seconds, he said without hesitation. She nodded, grateful for his presence, even in the periphery. Her son stood just off her shoulder, phone in hand, timing every beat with the solemn duty of a medic's assistant. He was no longer the withdrawn teenager she had known for the past 8 months. In this moment, he was focused, calm, and capable, just like Evan. The AED case was open now. The flight attendant, Lindsay, fumbled with the pads, her hands trembling. "I've got it," said a deeper voice behind them. A second attendant had arrived. He looked older, steadier. His name tag read Drew. "I'm certified," he said quickly. "I'll apply the pads. Keep compressions going." Naomi didn't respond, but gave a quick nod. Drew worked fast, cutting open the man's shirt with the shears from the med kit. The exposed chest was pale and still. He peeled the pads from their backing and applied them to the man's skin. One on the upper right, the other on the lower left, forming a diagonal over the heart. "Clear," he instructed. "Stop compressions." Naomi rocked back on her heels, gasping for breath. The muscles in her back screamed, and her legs had begun to shake from kneeling on the hard floor. She braced herself on the seat nearby and watched as the AED came to life. A female voice, robotic and emotionless, echoed through the cabin. "Analyzing heart rhythm. Do not touch the patient." The moment felt frozen. Even the child crying in the back had gone quiet. Passengers sat in a stunned silence, some with hands clasped in silent prayer, others too afraid to look. Naomi stared at the man's face. His silver hair was matted now from sweat and movement, his jaw slack. His body looked so incredibly still, like the breath had been sucked from every cell. Shock advised, "Charging, do not touch the patient." Drew lifted his hands instinctively, eyes scanning for movement around the man's body. "Everyone back," he said firmly. Malik stepped away. Naomi shifted further into the aisle, pulling her skirt around her knees. She reached for Ari, who had crept forward without her noticing. "Baby, back to your seat," Naomi whispered, voice breaking. "But Mom," Ari said, trembling, eyes wide. "I know," Naomi said gently. "It's okay. You're being so brave, but you need to go sit now. Please." Ari obeyed. Her small hands gripped the armrests as she watched from behind the seat back. The machine emitted a sharp, rising tone. "Shock, ready. Press the flashing orange button now." Naomi looked at Drew, who looked back at her. "It should be you," he said. Her hand hovered above the button. Her mind screamed with the weight of the choice. She thought of Evan again, of the man he had been. Calm. Precise. Trained for moments like this, he would have pressed the button without hesitation. But Naomi wasn't a soldier. She wasn't trained for this. She was a teacher, a mother, a woman whose hands had once only held beakers and textbooks. Now, they held a man's life. She exhaled, then pressed the button. The body jerked violently. A collective gasp swept through the cabin. The man's torso arched, then slammed back to the floor with a sickening finality. Naomi paused, waited. Nothing. "Resume compressions," the machine instructed. Naomi surged forward, back into position, starting second cycle. Malik called out, 1, 2, 3, 4. Her palms met the man's chest over and over. Her fingers dug in to find leverage. Her heart pounded in her ears louder than the engine's roar. A drop of sweat rolled down her temple and fell onto the man's collarbone. He was still unresponsive. Her breath came in gasps. She felt her arms giving out. "I can't," she whispered. "You can," Malik said firmly. "You are." She looked up at him and saw her husband's steadiness reflected in their son's eyes. She grit her teeth and kept going. 15 compressions, 20, 30. Drew leaned down with the mask and gave 2 rescue breaths. "Come on," Naomi whispered under her breath. "Come back." Another compression, another push. Then it happened, a faint flutter beneath her palms. She paused. Drew saw it too. "He's breathing," he said. Naomi froze. She felt it again. A shudder, a gasp, a stuttering breath drawn in from deep inside. His chest rose, then again, and again. The color began to return to his lips, though he was still ghostly pale. Passengers began to cry softly, whispering thank yous. A few clapped, but it quickly died in the hush that followed. "He's got a pulse," Drew said, his fingers pressed to the man's neck. "It's weak, but steady." Naomi sank back, tears streaming down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. Malik put a hand on her shoulder. "You did it," he said. Naomi turned to him, her voice barely audible. "No, we did." Ari came running up the aisle, throwing her arms around Naomi's waist. Naomi held both children tight, trembling, her body drained of strength but overflowing with something else. Relief, a sense of purpose, something beyond survival. Behind them, Lindsay spoke softly into the phone connected to the cockpit. "Yes, Captain, he's breathing. We need emergency services on the ground. Phoenix International. 20 minutes out." Naomi listened to every word, and for the first time since Evan's funeral, she allowed herself to believe in something bigger than the pain. She had just saved a man's life, but the universe wasn't finished with her yet. The man, lying unconscious on the floor of Flight 227, was not just a random stranger. He was the axis on which her life was about to turn. Naomi sat cross-legged in the aisle of row 4, her hands still resting on the man's chest as his shallow breaths continued, barely audible but real. Her palms tingled, her arms burned, but she didn't care. Every rise and fall of his chest felt like a confirmation that she hadn't failed again, that someone had come back. Flight attendants bustled around her now with calm urgency, their panic transformed into method. One draped a foil blanket over the man's legs, another knelt with an oxygen mask, gently securing it to his face. The tight professionalism of crisis had taken over. Naomi wasn't alone anymore, but for the past 6 minutes, she had been the only line between this man and the silence beyond. Malik crouched beside her, still holding the phone. The timer had stopped at 5 minutes and 42 seconds. "His pulse is stronger," Drew said, glancing from Naomi to the others, "breathing on his own now, but we'll keep him on oxygen until we land." The flight had begun to descend. Naomi could feel it in her stomach, in the slight pitch of the cabin, in the way the carts had disappeared and the lights had dimmed to a blue hush. "He's not conscious yet," Lindsay murmured. "That's okay," Naomi said. "We just need him alive." She looked down at the man's face again. Without the tension of unconsciousness, he looked years older. The stern lines around his mouth had softened. The gray in his beard looked more complete. Vulnerability suited him. Passengers nearby began to whisper again. Not with panic now, but awe. "That's her. She saved him. Do you think she's a doctor?" She didn't even hesitate. Naomi didn't respond. She wasn't interested in the noise. She only cared about the rhythm that still echoed in her bones. Ari leaned over the seat in front of her, whispering, "Mommy." Naomi turned. Ari's face was pale but calm. Her eyes were wide, but not afraid. They shimmered with something like admiration. "Is he going to be okay?" she asked. "I think so." "Sweetie?" Ari nodded and sat back. Naomi could see her hugging her sketchbook tightly to her chest. The intercom chimed. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. As many of you are aware, we experienced a medical emergency on board. We have been cleared for priority landing in Phoenix, Arizona, where paramedics will meet us at the gate. Please remain in your seats with your seat belts fastened. We thank you for your cooperation." Naomi exhaled slowly. Phoenix, That meant a longer delay before reaching Santa Barbara, but none of that mattered. The man in front of her was breathing. That was the only metric she cared about. Drew returned with a medical form in his hand and gently passed it to Naomi. "They'll want to know your name. Who responded first?" Naomi stared at the paper, then took the pen and wrote with a hand that still trembled. "Dr. Naomi Ellis." She hesitated before adding anything else. "Biology, not medicine. CPR certified." It didn't feel right to add qualifications after the fact. What she had done hadn't come from credentials. It had come from instinct, from memory, from pain. She handed the paper back and leaned her head against the seat beside her. The carpet smelled faintly of detergent and metal. Her knees ached, her mouth was dry, and yet in a strange, quiet corner of her heart, she felt whole. It wasn't a feeling she had known for months. After Evan died, there had been no closure, just silence, paperwork, flags folded with military precision, people telling her he had died a hero, as if that label made up for the gaping absence he left behind. She hadn't seen his body, hadn't spoken to him that day. The grief had come like a tide, sudden and relentless, and she had never quite learned how to breathe in it. But this moment, this chaos, this sweat and strain and impossible hope, it had given her something back. It had given her power, not the kind that came from position or authority, but the kind that lived in her own chest, the kind that came from acting in the face of fear, from refusing to look away. She didn't know why it mattered so much, only that it did. The wheels of the plane touched down with a jolt. The reverse thrust shook the cabin and sent murmurs rippling down the rows again. Naomi reached instinctively to steady herself, only to realize Malik's hand was already on her shoulder. "You good?" he asked softly. She nodded, too exhausted to speak. Outside the window, the runway lights streaked by, then slowed, then stopped. The plane taxied to a halt near the gate. Emergency vehicles were already waiting, their lights flashing in the silent urgency. Within minutes, EMTs boarded the aircraft, pushing through the crowd with gurney and gear in hand. The aisle cleared to make room. Naomi stepped back and watched as they examined the man, checked his vitals, spoke in hushed medical shorthand. "He's stable," one of them said. They lifted him gently onto the stretcher. He stirred for a moment, mumbling incoherently, and then his eyes fluttered open. For a fraction of a second, they met Naomi's. They were the eyes of a man who had been somewhere else, somewhere dark, somewhere cold, and now returned. He didn't say anything, but his gaze lingered. Then he was wheeled off the plane, the attendants following quickly behind. Naomi stood still for a moment. The cabin remained hushed. Then scattered applause broke out. It wasn't the roaring clapping of a celebration, but the soft, respectful sound of gratitude, of awe, of disbelief. Naomi didn't turn around. She didn't smile. She just stood there, her heart still beating in the rhythm she had memorized. 1, 2, 3, 4. When she finally returned to her seat, Ari immediately crawled into her lap and hugged her tightly. "You're a superhero," she said into Naomi's shoulder. Naomi let out a laugh that felt like a sob. "No, baby," she said. "I'm just your mom." Malik sat back down and resumed his headphones, but not before he looked at Naomi and nodded once. That was enough. They sat quietly as the remaining passengers settled back in. 20 minutes later, the flight took off again, bound for California. Naomi closed her eyes as the plane lifted from the tarmac, but this time, she didn't feel the weight of loss. She felt the weight of everything she still carried, and the strength that had somehow survived the storm. What she didn't yet know, what none of them knew, was who that man really was, and how saving his life would change everything they thought they understood. The cabin was quiet again, almost eerily so. The plane hummed gently through the night sky, cruising smoothly toward its new destination. Most of the passengers had settled back into their seats, heads resting against windows or tucked into neck pillows, but the atmosphere felt different now, as if everyone had breathed something in together: fear, wonder, uncertainty, and hadn't quite exhaled yet. Naomi Ellis leaned back in her seat, exhausted. Her body ached in places she hadn't felt in years. Her neck was tight, her shoulders sore, and her palms still tingled faintly from chest compressions. The adrenaline had worn off, and in its place came the full weight of what had just happened. She had saved a man's life. Not hypothetically, not metaphorically. She had put her hands on his chest and forced life back into him. She couldn't stop thinking about his eyes. Those few seconds when they opened and met hers, something passed between them. She wasn't even sure what it was. Gratitude, maybe, or something deeper, recognition. That didn't make sense. He was a stranger. Wasn't he? Naomi closed her eyes and tried to steady her breathing. Her heart still raced, not from fear now, but from the flood of thoughts that kept circling her mind like birds over open water. Ari had fallen back asleep on her shoulder. Her small breaths were warm and steady, her sketchbook still clutched in one arm. Naomi smoothed her daughter's hair and kissed her forehead gently. Malik sat by the window, earbuds in again, but he wasn't watching anything. He just stared out at the stars beyond the glass. Naomi glanced at him. "You okay?" she asked. He took out one earbud. "Yeah." "You sure?" He turned slightly toward her. His face was unreadable at first, but then he softened. "I didn't know you could do that," he said quietly. Naomi gave a small, tired smile. "Neither did I." He nodded. A beat passed. "You didn't even flinch," he added. "I was terrified," she said honestly, "but I just remembered what your dad used to say." Malik didn't speak. His jaw tensed slightly at the mention of Evan, but he didn't shut down like he usually did. "He would have been proud of you," Malik finally said. Naomi's eyes stung. She looked away toward the aisle, pretending to shift in her seat, but inside, her heart cracked open a little more, not with pain this time, with something warmer, healing, maybe. She had been so afraid their kids would lose touch with the good parts of Evan, that the grief would erase the admiration, the memory of who he was. But Malik had remembered, and he had seen it in her. That mattered. Naomi turned her attention forward again. The aisle was empty now. Only a single flight attendant remained standing near the galley. Quietly, speaking into a headset, "Lindsay." Naomi considered getting up to stretch her legs, but hesitated. Her body protested the idea. So instead, she took a slow sip from the water bottle that had been quietly placed on her tray table some time after takeoff. She hadn't even noticed. Probably Drew. She appreciated that kind of quiet kindness, the unannounced type. Her gaze wandered to the empty seat where the man from 4D had sat. He was gone, but not really. The image of him collapsing, convulsing, lying lifeless in the aisle was burned into her memory. And yet, now that her brain was calming, Details began to emerge that she hadn't registered before. His watch, sleek, modern, custom band, the tablet, high-end, no stickers, no branding, the clothes, tailored but understated, even the shoes polished, well worn, but not flashy. All of it pointed to someone successful, disciplined, private, but something else nagged at her. That look, those eyes. She had seen those eyes before, not just in that moment of consciousness. No, it went back further. Somewhere. Naomi furrowed her brow and leaned back again, trying to shake the feeling. Maybe she was just exhausted. Her mind was filling in gaps where there were none. But the thought lingered like fog. Who was he? She'd saved his life, and she didn't even know his name. She turned toward Lindsay, who had finished her call and was now making a quiet round through the cabin. When the attendant reached her row, Naomi raised a hand gently. "Hi," Naomi said, keeping her voice low so as not to wake Ari. "Do you happen to know the passenger's name?" The man in 4D, Lindsay, blinked. Surprised? She glanced around, then lowered her voice. "I probably shouldn't say." Naomi nodded. "Of course, I understand." She smiled and leaned back, but Lindsay hesitated. After a pause, she crouched slightly. "I can tell you this," she whispered. "When the paramedics boarded, they called him Mr. Wexler." Naomi's eyes narrowed slightly. Wexler, Lindsay nodded. That name sounded familiar. Naomi didn't answer. She wasn't sure yet. "Thank you," she said softly. Lindsay nodded and moved on. Wexler. Naomi let the name settle in her mind like a pebble dropped in still water. Why did it feel so heavy? She didn't know anyone named Wexler. Not personally, not socially, not in her university circles. It wasn't a name she could place easily. But then again, this wasn't about familiarity. It was about weight. Wexler. She opened the Notes app on her phone and typed the name, just in case. Then she slipped the phone into her bag and closed her eyes again. She tried to push the thoughts away. This was supposed to be a break, a family trip, an escape from everything, not a mystery. She wanted rest, peace. She'd earned it. But rest wouldn't come easy tonight, because somewhere in the desert below, an unconscious man with silver hair was being rushed to a hospital. A man who had stared into her soul like he knew her. A man named Wexler. And something told her this wasn't over, not even close. Naomi Ellis stared at her phone screen as the name sat there alone in a blank note. Wexler. It didn't seem extraordinary. It was short, plain, even, just 6 letters. But it had taken up permanent residence in her mind since the flight resumed. She'd tried to close her eyes and let sleep come. She'd tried to listen to the steady breathing of Ari against her side, the soft hum of the cabin, the whisper of air through the vents. But her thoughts kept circling back. Wexler. She wasn't sure if it was intuition or memory, but the name held gravity. It didn't just sound familiar, it felt like something she should have known already, something important. A man like him didn't blend in easily. From the first moment she noticed him on the plane seated upright, expression unreadable. Stylus dancing across the screen, he exuded a quiet command. Even unconscious. His body had resisted vulnerability. He wasn't ordinary. She'd felt it, seen it. And now she had his name. Sort of. She typed Wexler into her browser but stopped before hitting search. Was she being paranoid? Nosy, the man had nearly died. Digging into who he was felt invasive, yet at the same time A knot had formed in her stomach that wouldn't release. What if he was someone dangerous or worse? What if saving him had tied her and her children to something far bigger than she understood? Naomi set the phone down and rubbed her eyes. Malik was asleep now, slouched against the window with his hood over his head. She could still see one earbud dangling from his jacket. His long fingers were curled in his lap, twitching now and then, maybe caught in a dream. Ari had slid deeper into her seat, her sketchbook still cradled in her arms like a favorite stuffed animal. Naomi exhaled. She should be resting too, but something in her wouldn't let go. She picked the phone back up and hit search. It took less than 5 seconds. Grant Wexler. Her breath caught. There it was, his full name. Her screen flooded with results, news articles, op-eds, interviews. Images confirmed it instantly. The same man, same silver hair, same sharp features. The jawline a little less stern in younger photos, but the eyes, those were unmistakable. Grant Wexler, former aerospace CEO, now a reclusive investor, philanthropist, and more. Naomi scrolled quickly, scanning headlines. Wexler steps down amid ethics probe insiders silent on Wexler's exit from Helix Aerodyne. Wexler resurfaces with controversial acquisition of rural tech lab. There were no convictions, no formal charges, but the whispers were everywhere. Whistleblower settlements, safety lapses, layoffs timed suspiciously before inspections. He'd left the public spotlight years ago. Until tonight, he had vanished completely. Naomi's hand trembled slightly. She had saved a man whose name had once filled headlines, a man connected to one of the country's largest aerospace firms, a man whose silence had cost others dearly if the reports were true, and he was now tied to her by one fragile thread. His life had continued because of her. Naomi stared at his photo. In the image, he was speaking on a panel at a tech conference, microphone in hand, back straight, mouth slightly downturned. The caption read, "Grant Wexler addresses safety concerns at Global Flight Symposium." What were the odds? She set the phone down and leaned back in her seat, thoughts swirling. The memory of pressing on his chest returned with painful clarity. The sound of her own breath, the tremble in her legs, the surge of hope when he took that first breath again. Had she known who he was? Would she have hesitated? Naomi hated the question. It made her feel ugly. Of course not, she told herself. A life is a life. But something about the discovery unsettled her. She had spent the last year watching people skirt accountability, watching systems fail those who deserved justice. And now, here was a man whose very name had come to symbolize that failure in an industry she once trusted. Her brother-in-law had worked for Helix Aerodyne, briefly, before being laid off without warning. She remembered the bitterness in his voice, the way his confidence crumbled afterward. He'd called Wexler a ghost, someone who made decisions behind mirrored glass and never came out to face the consequences. She hadn't thought about that in years, but now, the ghost had a heartbeat again. Thanks to her. A faint chime broke her thoughts. Seatbelt sign on. The cabin lights shifted gently. An announcement played. The plane was preparing for descent into Santa Barbara. Naomi's heart beat faster again. She looked out the window. Even though she was still a few rows from it, the horizon was dark, peppered with distant city lights below. The mountains loomed like sleeping giants beyond the coastline. Soon, this flight would end. Soon, she'd step off the plane, gather her children, collect their bags, and walk back into regular life. But the seed had already been planted. a connection forged midair. What would happen now? Would he reach out? Did he even remember her face? Would his team track her down? Or would this disappear into the ocean of unspoken things? Just another anonymous miracle in a world spinning too fast to notice. Naomi didn't believe in coincidence. Not anymore. Not after losing Evan to a freak equipment malfunction the Army refused to fully explain. Not after sitting in empty rooms with lawyers who only spoke in maybes and redactions. Fate had a strange sense of humor. As the plane descended, Naomi gently nudged Ari awake. Her daughter stirred, rubbed her eyes, and yawned wide. "Are we there?" she mumbled. "Almost," Naomi whispered, brushing a lock of hair from her forehead. Malik stretched beside them and pulled his hood down. "I dreamed we were flying again," he said, voice still groggy. Naomi smiled faintly. "We are." He blinked slowly and then nodded, as if confirming it wasn't just the dream lingering. They touched down with a soft bounce, the tires skimming the runway before finding grip. The engines roared softly in reverse. The plane slowed. They had made it. As they waited to deboard, Naomi felt a strange calm settle over her. She wasn't sure what would come next, but she knew something had changed. In her, in them, and somewhere in a hospital bed in Phoenix. A man named Grant Wexler was breathing. She had given him that. Now the question was, what would he do with it? The hotel room was quiet except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the steady rhythm of ocean waves beyond the sliding glass door. Naomi Ellis sat at the small desk tucked into the corner of the suite, staring at the blinking cursor on her laptop screen. The document was blank. She had opened it to write something, maybe a journal entry, maybe a letter to Evan she'd never send, but all she could do was sit there, fingers frozen above the keyboard. It had been 2 days since they'd landed in Santa Barbara, 2 days since the flight, since the man in 4D collapsed, since she brought him back. The world hadn't changed, but she had. She kept thinking it would pass, that the weight in her chest would lift, that the memory of compressing his chest, of counting out loud in a trembling whisper, would fade like other memories. But it hadn't. She heard his breath return every time she closed her eyes. She hadn't told Alicia much, just the basics: medical emergency, CPR, emergency landing. Naomi brushed over the details when her sister-in-law picked them up from the airport, eager to avoid questions she didn't know how to answer. Alicia had offered her the guest room and a week of sun and quiet, and Naomi had accepted both with grateful exhaustion. Now it was morning. Ari and Malik were still asleep in the second bedroom. Alicia had gone to work. Naomi had the suite to herself, and yet she felt anything but alone. She stood and walked to the balcony, pulling the glass door open and stepping into the cool coastal air. The ocean stretched out before her, dotted with early morning paddleboarders and distant sailboats. A couple jogged along the sand below. The world looked normal, beautiful even, and still she couldn't shake the sense that something was coming. Her phone vibrated against the desk. She turned. One notification, no number, no name, just a single word, "Thank you." Naomi stared at the screen. Her breath hitched. There was no context, no signature. But she knew. It wasn't a guess. It was certainty. Grant Wexler had woken up, and he remembered. She sat back down, slowly. Her fingers hovered over the phone as if it might burn her. Then she opened the message fully. There was nothing more, no follow-up, no request, Just the message itself. Direct, weighted, thank you. She could have ignored it, blocked the number, moved on. But something about the simplicity of it, something about the way it left so much unsaid drew her in. Naomi typed a response, her thumbs trembling slightly. "You're welcome. I'm glad you're okay." She hit send. A full minute passed, then another. No response came. Naomi set the phone down and leaned back in her chair. She wasn't sure what she expected. An explanation, a second message, an apology for scaring her half to death mid-flight. She laughed under her breath at the absurdity of that thought. Wexler didn't seem like the apologizing type. She opened her browser again and typed his name into the search bar. Dozens of results she'd skimmed before filled the screen once more. But one new article caught her eye. Former Helix CEO survives in-flight cardiac arrest. Her chest tightened. She clicked the link. It was a short piece, barely 3 paragraphs. The incident was mentioned in clinical terms. A man identified as Grant Wexler had experienced a medical emergency on board a commercial flight to Santa Barbara, an emergency landing in Phoenix, stable condition upon the hospital arrival. No statement given. There was no mention of her, no credit, no eyewitness accounts. Naomi wasn't surprised. If anything, it confirmed what she already suspected. Wexler had the means to control the narrative. He could vanish and reappear with precision. She closed the browser and stood up. The sun was climbing now, casting golden light across the hardwood floor, somewhere inside the suite. She heard Ari's footsteps padding toward the kitchen. Mom, her daughter, called. Naomi turned. Ari appeared in her pajamas, hair tangled from sleep, her sketchbook tucked under one arm. "Morning, baby. Can I draw outside?" Naomi smiled. "Of course. I'll make breakfast." Ari ran past her onto the balcony, already flipping open to a fresh page. Naomi watched her for a moment before heading into the kitchen. She poured orange juice into a glass and scrambled a few eggs. Her movements were automatic, but her mind was far away. She kept wondering what Wexler wanted. If this message was a goodbye, a thank you and nothing more, or if he was opening a door, if he was testing the water. By the time she finished breakfast and set 2 plates on the balcony table, Ari had already sketched a new character, a woman with a long braid and bright gold gloves. "She saves people," Ari said between bites, "but she doesn't wear a cape. She doesn't like capes." Naomi chuckled. "Why not? They get in the way when she's flying." Naomi leaned back in her chair and looked at the ocean again. Ari's words stayed with her. Maybe she didn't need a cape either. Maybe what she had done wasn't about becoming someone new. Maybe it was about remembering who she already was. Her phone buzzed again. She reached for it quickly. Another message. This time, there was a name attached, Grant Wexler, and the message was longer. "I'd like to thank you properly. Are you still in Santa Barbara?" Naomi's mouth went dry. He knew where she'd landed. She should have expected that. But seeing it in text made something in her pulse jump. She hesitated before reply. "Yes." No greeting, no punctuation, just the truth. Another pause. Then came his reply. "May I send someone with a message?" Her fingers hovered over the screen. She had the impulse to say no, to shut the door before it opened wider, but some deeper part of her, the part that kept seeing his eyes flutter open, said yes before she could stop it. "Okay." The message read. She locked her phone and stood. Somewhere, a door had just opened, and she had just stepped through it. The knock came just after noon. Naomi Ellis had been sitting at the breakfast bar, sipping coffee gone lukewarm, the hum of the ceiling fan mixing with the distant call of seagulls. She wasn't expecting anyone, not the delivery Alicia promised. Not a neighbor. Her phone had been quiet since Wexler's last message that morning. She paused, her cup still in hand. Another knock, firmer this time. Ari looked up from her coloring book on the living room carpet. "Are we expecting someone?" she asked. Naomi shook her head. "Stay here." "Okay." She walked slowly to the door, heart already beating faster. The peephole showed a man in a dark suit, neatly pressed, no tie. He stood straight but not stiff, confident but not aggressive. She opened the door just a crack. "Ms. Ellis," the man asked, voice calm. "Yes, I was asked to deliver something on behalf of Mr. Wexler. May I come in?" Naomi's grip on the door tightened. She studied him. Early 40s, maybe. Clean cut. No badge, no briefcase, just a small black envelope in his hand. "What is it?" she asked. He held up the envelope between two fingers, as if to show it wasn't dangerous. "A personal letter," he said. "Nothing more." She didn't move. He waited a beat, then added, he thought it best not to send it digitally. Naomi considered her options. Slam the door and walk away. Or take the letter and read it in her own time. "Just the envelope," she said, opening the door fully but stepping back slightly. He handed it to her with both hands, nodded once, then turned and walked away without another word. She closed the door gently. Ari stood behind her now. "Who was that?" "Just a messenger," Naomi said. "It's okay." She didn't open the envelope immediately. She held it for a moment, feeling the weight of the paper, the faint texture of expensive stationery. Her name was written on the front in pen. Naomi. Nothing more. No last name. No return address. She sat back at the kitchen counter and opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet, handwritten. Naomi. There are moments when life offers no script, no agenda, just a choice. Yours changed the trajectory of mine. I do not believe in accidents. What happened aboard that flight was not coincidence. You gave me time I did not deserve, and for reasons you couldn't have known, you reminded me what it feels like to be seen. I owe you more than words, but for now, they must do. If you're willing, I'd like to speak, not as a man looking for gratitude, but as one seeking understanding. There's a garden cafe at the corner of Ortega and Parkside. Tomorrow at 10. No obligation. Grant Naomi read the letter twice, then a third time. Her coffee had gone completely cold. She didn't know what she expected a legal form. An apology, maybe silence. But this was vulnerable. She set the letter down and walked to the balcony. The ocean was calm today, pale blue and glassy. A family was building sandcastles on the beach below. Someone laughed in the courtyard. She folded her arms. Did she want to see him? What could he possibly say that would make sense of any of this? And yet, part of her wanted to go. Not for him, but for herself. She had questions too, not just about the flight, about why he was on it, why he was alone, why the news story was so sterile, so stripped of detail, but also about who he was, who he had been, and what her role in his life now meant. Ari came to stand beside her, rubbing her eyes. "Are we going to the beach today?" "Maybe later," Naomi said. "Would you like that?" Ari nodded. "Can I bring my watercolors?" Of course. They went down that afternoon and spent hours near the tide line. Naomi let herself rest for the first time in days. watching Airy paint shells in wet sand, letting the sea breeze tangle her curls. She almost forgot about the letter tucked in her pocket. But that night, after Malik returned from his walk and Airy had fallen asleep with a sketchbook on her chest, Naomi stood at the window again and reread the note by moonlight. She didn't understand him, but something about the words had felt honest. And honesty, she had learned, was rarer than most people believed. The next morning, Naomi dressed simply, black slacks, a pale blue blouse, no makeup. She pinned her hair up loosely and left a note for Alicia in the kitchen, just going for coffee. Back by noon. She walked the 6 blocks to Ortega and Parkside, the city just waking up around her. Storefronts opening, cyclists weaving between cars. The morning light spilled like gold across the sidewalks. The garden cafe was small and tucked behind a trellis of jasmine and vines. She spotted him instantly. Grant Wexler sat at a corner table, back to the hedge, hands folded neatly on the table. No phone, no laptop, just him and a glass of water. He looked older than she remembered from the articles, more fragile than the man she had revived, but also more human. He stood when he saw her. Naomi hesitated, then stepped forward. "Mr. Wexler, Ms. Ellis, thank you for coming." They sat, for a moment, neither spoke. Then he leaned slightly forward. "I owe you everything," he said quietly, "and I have no idea how to begin." Naomi studied him. His voice was low, deliberate. There was no grand gesture in him, no rehearsed performance. "Start with why you were on that flight," she said. Grant smiled faintly. Direct. "I like that." She waited. He looked down at his hands for a moment before answering. "I was going to Santa Barbara to disappear." Naomi blinked. "Disappear." He nodded. "I had planned to check into a private clinic. Off the grid, no press, no visits. I've been ill for some time. The flight was supposed to be quiet, final, clean." Her stomach twisted. "You were giving up. I was letting go." He corrected. "There's a difference." And now he met her eyes. "You interrupted that plan, with compassion, with risk. You gave me breath I didn't ask for. And now I find myself wondering if maybe I was wrong to choose silence." Naomi looked away. Her hands were cold on the porcelain coffee cup in front of her. "I didn't know who you were," she said. "If I had, you would have still saved me," he said, with certainty. She didn't answer. He leaned back. "I wasn't sure you'd come. Most people only see the headlines. I'm not most people." "No," he said. "You're not." They sat in silence for a while. Then Naomi asked the question she hadn't said out loud to anyone. "Why me? Why send someone? Why?" The letter Grant looked at her for a long moment. "Because you reminded me that people still do the right thing when no one's watching." She felt something break loose inside her. A knot she didn't know had formed. He continued, softer now, and I thought, maybe I should start watching again too. The wind picked up around the garden cafe, rustling the jasmine vines that curled along the wooden lattice. Naomi Ellis wrapped her fingers tighter around her coffee cup, unsure if it was the breeze that gave her a chill or the weight of the moment. Grant Wexler sat across from her, his hands still and steady, his expression unreadable. He had just admitted he was preparing to vanish from the world, to let go. She hadn't yet decided how she felt about that. He studied her face carefully. "Do you think I'm a coward?" Naomi didn't answer right away. Her first instinct was yes, but she'd spent too many nights sitting with Malik's grief, Too many mornings staring at Evan's old coat, still hanging behind her bedroom door. Grief didn't follow logic, and neither did surrender. I think, she said slowly, you were tired of being a villain in someone else's story. His eyes flickered. That's more generous than I deserve. I'm not being generous, she said. I'm being honest. A silence fell between them, not heavy, but not comfortable either. Grant looked down at the table. You said you didn't know who I was on the plane. But now that you do, why did you agree to meet me? Naomi turned her gaze toward the sidewalk. Because I've spent a long time asking questions and getting silence. I figured if you were offering words, I should hear them. He gave a single nod. That's fair. She looked back at him, her voice steady. Did you know someone named Evan Ellis? His face froze. Naomi watched it happen, a flicker, barely noticeable. But there, that name, she pressed, mean anything to you? Grant didn't answer right away. He took a breath, then another. I've reviewed a lot of names over the years, he said carefully, but yes, I know the name Ellis. Naomi's stomach twisted. Her voice dropped low. He was my husband. Grant closed his eyes. Naomi continued, slower now. He was a field engineer, contracted through Helix Aerodyne. He died 2 years ago. Faulty equipment, malfunction mid-test. The military washed their hands of it. Said it was the manufacturer's responsibility. Grant opened his eyes, and there was something in them she hadn't seen before. Shame. I remember the report, he said quietly. I was briefed, but by then, I was already on my way out. The decisions, they'd been made. Naomi swallowed hard. That doesn't bring him back. No, he said. It doesn't. She felt her hands begin to shake and force them still. I have 2 kids, she said. Malik was 13. Ari was 5. They watched me come apart for months. I never got an apology. Never even got a name from your company. Just red tape. His voice was barely audible. I'm sorry. Naomi let the silence expand around them. She wanted those words to feel like something, but they didn't. Not yet. She stood abruptly. Grant started to rise, but she held out a hand. I'm not walking away, she said. But I can't sit here and pretend this is just a coffee meeting. I understand. No, she said, meeting his eyes. I don't think you do. Because for you, this might be about redemption. For me, this is about survival. You almost died, and I still don't know what you're going to do with the life I gave you. He sat back down slowly. Naomi paced a few feet, trying to settle the storm inside her. I didn't bring you back to fix anything, she said. I didn't even know who you were, but now that I do, I can't ignore it. Grant nodded. Then don't. Ask anything. She turned, staring at him. Why didn't you say something on the plane? Why not reveal who you were? I didn't want to be recognized. He said, the name Wexler. It doesn't carry trust anymore, and I couldn't handle the looks, the judgment, so you let yourself disappear. He didn't deny it. Naomi folded her arms. And now you want what forgiveness? No, he said firmly. I don't expect that from you, or anyone. Then, what he leaned forward. I want to give you something, not out of guilt, but because you changed the direction of my life. She raised an eyebrow. Money. No, he said quickly. That would insult everything you are. I want to fund something in your name, a foundation, a safety review board, a place where stories like Evan's get heard, investigated, made public, transparent. Naomi blinked. She hadn't expected that. you'd give me that control she asked. He nodded. If you want it. She sat down again, slower this time. Her heart was still pounding. This isn't an apology, she said. No, he said. It's a starting line. Naomi looked down at her hands. She saw Evan's ring still on her finger. She saw the creases from years of gripping strollers, sketchbooks, suitcases. She exhaled. I don't know if I can trust you, she admitted. You shouldn't, he said. Not yet. That's something I'll have to earn. She looked at him again. For the first time, she believed him. Not entirely. Not with open arms, but enough. Enough to keep the door open. The wind blew a napkin off the table. Grant caught it midair with surprising reflexes. Naomi managed a half smile. You sure you're recovered? He returned the smile faintly. Working on it. They sat in stillness. Two people linked by pain, by circumstance, and by the thinnest thread of possibility. As they stood to leave, Grant reached into his coat and handed her a second envelope. What's this A name? He said. Someone you should talk to. Someone who knew more about what happened to your husband than I did. Naomi held the envelope taut. I'll read it, she said. He nodded once. Goodbye. Naomi. Goodbye. Grant. She walked away without looking back, envelope clenched in hand. There were still ghosts to face. But maybe now. She had a map. The envelope sat untouched on the nightstand. Naomi Ellis had stared at it for the better part of an hour after returning from the cafe. She hadn't even told Alicia she'd met with Grant Wexler. Not because she didn't trust her, but because she didn't yet trust her own emotions. What she'd felt during that conversation defied simple labels like anger, forgiveness, or even closure. It was something heavier, something sharper, a sense that her life had just tilted on a hinge, and everything familiar might look different when it swung open. That night, long after Ari and Malik had fallen asleep, Naomi finally opened the envelope. Inside was a single business card, a name, Delaney Ross, former Helix, Aerodyne Test Engineer Independent Consultant, San Diego, and below the name, in neat blue ink, a handwritten note. She was there. Naomi read it 3 times, then placed it back in the envelope and slid it under her pillow. Sleep didn't come easy. The next morning, she asked Alicia to watch the kids and took the first available train to San Diego. The ride along the coast should have been calming, sunlight bouncing off the water, seagulls gliding past, but Naomi's thoughts were anything but peaceful. Who was Delaney Ross? What had she seen, and why had Grant never spoken of her before by the time Naomi arrived? Her stomach was tight with tension. Delaney's office was in an industrial park near the harbor. A simple glass door, no sign, just a paper taped inside the window with her name and a bell. Naomi pressed it. Footsteps approached. A woman opened the door, tall, early 50s, ash blonde hair pulled into a messy bun, a grease stain on her jeans. No makeup. Her eyes were tired, but sharp. You must be Naomi, she said without preamble. Naomi nodded. He told you I might come. Delaney stepped aside and gestured her in. He texted, said you'd have questions. The office was cluttered but clean. Diagrams of turbine systems lined the walls. A framed certificate from MIT sat crooked on a shelf beside a coffee-stained mug. Naomi took a seat as Delaney pulled off her gloves and tossed them on the workbench. I'm not going to ask how much he told you, Delaney said. But if you came all the way down here, I'm guessing it's not about tea and sympathy? Naomi nodded slowly. My husband's name was Evan Ellis. He died during a systems test, one tied to a Helix contract. Delaney's face tightened. She sat across from Naomi, lacing her fingers together. "I remember," she said. "He wasn't supposed to be in that chamber that day. He volunteered, covered for a junior tech who had a sick kid." Naomi's chest ached. She hadn't known that. Delaney continued. "I was 2 rooms over. I heard the alarm. The heat sensor tripped 20 seconds too late. When I got there, the override had failed." Naomi's voice cracked. "They told me it was a fluke." Delaney let out a bitter laugh. "They would." Naomi leaned forward. What really happened, Delaney's jaw clenched. The heat shielding was defective. The batch had failed internal tests twice, but they pushed it through anyway. Someone up the ladder overrode the safety hold, said the timeline couldn't slip. Naomi's throat went dry. "Do you know who signed off? I do," Delaney said, "and I submitted a formal objection. I even attached a memo. But once the death occurred, everything vanished. Paper trail evaporated. My report was buried." Naomi's heart beat loud in her ears. So they knew. And they still blamed Evan. Delaney nodded. He wasn't the first casualty, but he was the first one with a family who kept asking questions. Naomi's hands curled into fists. "Why didn't you come forward?" Delaney's eyes burned with regret. "I was threatened. Not directly, but they made it clear. If I spoke, I'd never work in the industry again. I had a daughter in college, a mortgage. They counted on my silence." Naomi stood up and paced the room. Her body shook not from rage, but from something colder. The knowledge that her husband's death wasn't just tragic, it was preventable, and someone had made a decision that cost him his life. "I want to blow this wide open," she said. "I want names, records, everything." Delaney didn't flinch. "I'll give you what I have. I've kept backups, printed copies, audio logs. I couldn't live with myself otherwise." Naomi turned to her, eyes fierce. "Why now?" Delaney swallowed. "Because I almost did come forward before, and I didn't. I've spent every day since wishing I had. Maybe this is my shot at doing something right." They locked eyes. Then Delaney walked to a locked cabinet and pulled out a thick file folder. She handed it to Naomi. "This has everything I've got. It won't be enough to convict anyone, but it'll be enough to start asking better questions." Naomi took it with both hands. The weight of it felt heavier than paper. It felt like a key. Before she left, Delaney walked her to the door. "One more thing," she said quietly. "Grant Wexler was in the room when that order was pushed through. He didn't sign it, but he didn't stop it either." Naomi met her gaze. "I know." Delaney paused. "Then why save him?" Naomi stepped out into the sunlight. Folder pressed to her chest. "I didn't know who he was." And then she added, more quietly, "But now that I do, he's going to help fix it." The moment Naomi Ellis stepped into the small conference room of the local advocacy group, the weight of what she carried pressed down on her like a physical force. The thick folder from Delaney Ross was clutched tightly in her hands, the edges worn from restless fingers. This was no longer just a personal story. It was a fight for justice. A group of 4 sat waiting around a long table, 3 women and a man, each with expressions ranging from wary to resolute. Marina Wolfe, Wexler's former chief of staff, was not among them today, and Naomi was grateful. There were too many ghosts she wasn't ready to face just yet. "Naomi," Alicia Ward said warmly as she opened the door to greet her. Alicia had been a quiet pillar through the last weeks, but today she looked more determined than ever. Ready. Naomi nodded, swallowing a lump of anxiety. Inside, the lead organizer, a sharp-eyed woman named Carmen, gestured for Naomi to take a seat. "We've heard some of your story," Carmen said, voice calm but laced with steel. "Now, show us the proof." Naomi opened the folder carefully and began to lay out the documents, internal memos, test failure reports, emails between executives, and audio transcripts of meetings. Each piece was a thread weaving together a picture far darker than any public record suggested. The equipment was faulty, Naomi explained quietly but firmly. Multiple warnings were ignored. My husband, Evan Ellis, was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But the fault is corporate. It's systemic. Carmen nodded. "This is serious. If this gets out, people will be angry." Naomi finished. They should be. The group spent the next hour strategizing, drafting press releases, planning legal steps, and considering protective measures. Naomi listened, absorbing every detail, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fierce resolve. Later, as she stepped outside into the bright California sun, her phone buzzed, a text from Marina Wolf. "We need to talk. It's urgent." Naomi's breath caught. She debated ignoring it, but something told her she couldn't. She agreed to meet Marina at a quiet cafe downtown. When Naomi arrived, Marina was already there, sitting alone at a corner table, her usual polished exterior softened by a shadow of worry. "Thank you for coming," Marina said as Naomi sat. "I'm listening," Naomi replied. Marina's eyes darted around briefly before she leaned in. "Grant's been getting pressure. Internal board meetings, legal threats, even from people you wouldn't expect." Naomi frowned. "Why?" "Because he's shaking things up," Marina said quietly. "His survival isn't just personal. It's a liability for some of the old guard. They see him as a threat." Naomi's mind raced. The man she had saved was now fighting a war on multiple fronts, and she was right in the middle. "Do you think he's safe?" Naomi asked. Marina sighed. "No, and neither are you." That night. Naomi lay awake listening to the steady breathing of Malik and Ari in the next room. She felt the storm gathering around her family. The decision was no longer about her. It was about all of them. The next morning, she met with Grant in his hospital room. He was thinner now, the bruises of recovery still evident, but his eyes burned with the same fierce light she'd seen before. "We have to prepare," he said. "They will try to discredit us, to silence you." Naomi nodded, her voice steady. "I'm ready." Together. They began planning the public reveal, the moment when private tragedy would become public reckoning. As the sun set over Santa Barbara, Naomi Ellis felt the weight of the fight ahead. But, for the first time since Evan's death, she did not feel alone. She had allies, she had truth, and she had the courage to face the storm. The day Naomi Ellis had feared and anticipated arrived with a restless dawn. The morning light filtered weakly through the curtains of her modest apartment, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and deepen the burden she carried. Today was the day everything would change, the day the silence surrounding Evan's death, and the years of hidden corporate negligence would be shattered. Naomi sat at her kitchen table, the thick folder from Delaney Ross now worn from repeated handling. It contained more than just evidence, it carried the weight of grief, betrayal, and a fierce determination for justice. Malik was still asleep in the next room, and Ari was curled up with her sketchbook, but Naomi's thoughts were elsewhere. Her phone buzzed quietly on the table. A message from Grant Wexler ready. She swallowed hard and typed back, yes. Together, they had planned the day's steps carefully. A press conference was scheduled at a community center downtown. Local reporters and national media were expected. Legal representatives from advocacy groups stood ready to support. What began as a private pain was now a public reckoning. Naomi dressed deliberately in a simple navy blouse and black slacks, clothes that felt both functional and symbolic. The navy was for strength, the black for mourning and memory. Her heart pounded not from fear but resolve. When she arrived at the community center, a crowd was already gathering. Familiar faces from the neighborhood, friends of Evan's, people who had lost loved ones to systemic failures, and the curious eyes of reporters. Cameras flashed, microphones were lined up, and a sense of electric anticipation filled the air. Grant was there too, seated quietly beside her, his presence a testament to survival and the complicated nature of redemption. Though fragile, his gaze was steady, no longer the haunted look Naomi had first seen on that airplane. Naomi stepped up to the podium and took a breath. The room fell silent. She began not with accusations, but with a story. The story of Evan Ellis, a man who had given everything to protect others, a man who had trusted the systems designed to keep him safe, and a man whose life was taken by corporate greed and negligence. Her voice was clear, resonant, carrying years of pain and determination. As she spoke, she saw heads nodding in recognition, eyes welling with tears. This was not just her fight anymore. It was theirs. Grant followed with a statement that surprised many. No corporate doublespeak, no vague regrets, just accountability and a promise to help rebuild trust. He spoke about the changes he was committing to the creation of a foundation dedicated to independent oversight of military and industrial safety, increased transparency, and support for families affected by preventable tragedies. Together, Naomi and Grant unveiled a plan for the Ellis-Wexler Initiative, a collaborative effort aimed at preventing future losses like Evan's and providing a platform for voices long silenced. The press questions came fast and sharp. Reporters pressed on specifics, the role of executives, and the legal battles to come. Naomi answered with unwavering honesty, refusing to be baited into anger or defensiveness. In the crowd, Alicia stood with Malik and Ari, their faces a mixture of pride and hope. Malik caught Naomi's eye and gave a subtle thumbs up, a small gesture that anchored her through the storm. Later, as the conference dispersed and the sun dipped low over the city, Naomi and Grant stood together outside, the weight of the day settling upon them. "We did it," Naomi said softly, "but I know this is just the beginning." Grant nodded. "Justice isn't a moment, it's a process, and I'm ready to walk that path with you." Naomi looked out at the horizon. The sky was painted in hues of orange and purple, a reminder that even after darkness, light could break through. She thought of Evan, of Malik and Ari, of every family shattered by avoidable loss. Today was their day, their chance to rewrite the story. As the last light faded, Naomi felt a quiet peace take root, a peace born not from forgetting the past, but from facing it head-on. The reckoning was here, and she would meet it with courage. Naomi Ellis's story reminds us that courage often looks like quiet strength, and that healing can come from facing the darkest truths. It shows how one mother's refusal to accept injustice sparked a ripple of change far beyond her own pain. But it also forces us to confront the harsh reality of systems that fail families like hers, and the urgent need to hold those in power accountable. In a world where discrimination and neglect still claim too many lives, this story calls us to stand for dignity, justice, and empathy. It challenges us to see beyond headlines, to listen deeper, and to act with integrity. If Naomi's journey moved you, if it stirred your heart and awakened your hope, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel. Together, we can keep telling stories that matter, stories that honor resilience, fight injustice, and inspire change. Stay with us. There are many more stories waiting to be told, and your voice is part of the movement.